Let's get to work. Hashtag again, HU Home, hashtag HU Home, hashtag Barracoon, and our @ for Twitter, @CoasFreshSim. I'm going to pay Diwali first respect to some elders, now ancestors. This is actually next door in Blackburn Center, upstairs in the ballroom. The man to your right, all the way to your right in the wheelchair, that's Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, who is an ancestor. He lived to 95 years old, passed away a couple of years ago. That was one of the first people of African descent to take Africans from the diaspora. He's from Puerto Rico, but he lived in New York for years. He started going to Egypt in the 1940s and 50s. He couldn't even stay in the white hotels. He slept literally in the desert. And he then began to take African Americans, African Caribbeans, African Latin Americans, people from other parts of Africa to ancient Egypt, to study ancient Egypt. So very important, pioneer in that regard. The sister in the middle, that's Queen Mother Kefa Neptis. Kefa Neptis, very important sister from Georgia, lived in New York for years. She and her husband Bill were the founders of something called the First World Alliance. We'll talk more about that in a second, which is the premier study group for regular black folks. Sometimes people from college would come, but mostly just folks living and working in New York. And we know New York is a Pan-African city. I first met Sister Kefa in person in 1989 when I went up there to work. I was a law student. I clerked at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and they kind of adopted me. So I've learned more, as I'm sure we all have, from people outside of universities than inside them. So she became an ancestor 2 years ago. And the man to your left, that's the big man, the great Randy Weston. We've been listening to his music the last couple of weeks because his funeral was in New York 2 weeks ago. I mean, we talked about that last week. That's the opening ritual for his funeral. A couple of thousand people at the Cathedral of St. John's the Divine that gave respect to Baba Randy. That's his wife there on the right, Fatoumata from Senegal, and the youngest person there next to her, one of her great-grandchildren, you see there, the baby. But there were very few young people there, meaning there were very few people in their 20s, 30s. A couple of thousand people, more than a couple of thousand were there. This man who played with Thelonious Monk and Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong, who knew very well all of them, Miles Davis, Melba Liston. But at his ritual for transition, one of the things that was striking were there weren't a whole lot of young people there. And so the question then becomes, how do you link generations? How do you link generations? So the question we raise is, how do we build a we? Who are we? We say we, it's like we assume what we are talking about. But who is we? How do we talk about home? Because y'all got that final project. And what is our relationship to home? So we'll go back to Michael Jackson. And we have to talk about Michael Jackson, not just in the context of his work as an artist, but as in his life as a human being and how we perceive him as a human being. And before we do that, which we'll do momentarily, I want to talk a little bit about the notion of home as it comes through another project he was involved in 1975. But before we do that, a couple of equations for those of y'all who are into the sciences, right? Time plus space equals place. What does that mean? Time is the one thing we have. We're born, we die. In between then, we have time. Time is the one resource that makes every other of the resources possible. It's not money, it's not prestige, it's time. We spend our time in space. Space is the environment through which we experience time. We don't know when time begins or ends. We just know that when we come out of our mother's wombs, we are now in space. And we grow, we mature, we decay, we die. But we do it all in space. And where we do it in space, how we experience those spaces creates our sense of place. Y'all been here now a little bit over a month. When you came, this was a new space. Now it's your space. It becomes a place for you. In about a month, we have homecoming. But you'll see people come back who will remember this space from their time here. So their place in Howard is very different in some ways. A friend, brother Ta-Nehisi Coates says, you know, I didn't finish all my degree requirements for Howard University, but I was graduated from the Mecca. The Mecca is a place. Howard University is a place, but those two places are not co-equal. You understand? Very interesting. So that's one. Number two, what is the function of remembering? What is the function of memory in creating home? How we remember home isn't what home is in reality, except it is. It's how we remember it. Now, everybody here is an adult now, meaning what? When you go home and the older you get, every time you go home, it seems like the space gets smaller and smaller. I grew up in this room. This room looks so small now. People come back from homecoming, they go to the quad or they go somewhere like, man, this little ass room right here was 3 people in this room. Can you believe that? I mean, it's small for y'all now. Wait till you 45 or 50 years old with your child. Coming back in here and be like, Ma, did you all live in this? Yeah. It seemed a lot bigger then. The function of memory. Jules Harrell will talk about that in a couple of weeks. A master scholar will talk about the nature of memory and how our brains aren't the same. How the cells in our brains are constantly regenerating. Our brains are plastic. So the memories in them have to be passed on from neuron to neuron and then recreated as our brain cells regenerate. The thing we have in our skulls is not a permanent thing. Its presence in our skull is temporary till we die, but it's constantly reworking. So our memories are constantly reimagining. That's why study is important. We know that because y'all got to study, right? Imagination and vision. What does it mean to imagine another future or have a vision for something different if we don't stand in a space? A lot of what we want to do is shaped by what we've done so far or what we're aware of. Very important to understand. And then finally, where do we stand? What does home mean as base? As y'all are thinking about these final projects, what does home mean as base when you can't go back to the place that you were born and raised? Very important. So as I said, we're going to walk our way back to Michael Jackson. We're going to walk through a project that he was involved in about 2 decades before Remember the Time. Y'all ever seen that? They done remade it, right? They remade it, right? They did a live remake, right? This is during y'all time. They made a movie of it. There's Mike on the end. It's a scarecrow, right? Diana Ross, Nipsey Russell, Richard Pryor was in there as the Wiz. I'm like, come on, man, this is an interesting thing, right? And so your parents' generation, my generation, which would be about the same, Dr. Williams' generation, we remember the Wiz from the movie. We also remember the Wiz because before it was a movie, where was it? It was on Broadway. It was a play. Exactly right. 1975. Now, Diana Ross didn't play Dorothy in 1975. Who did? Somebody said it. Say it again, those of you who said it. Stephanie Mills. Look at y'all. That's what I'm talking. You like that Stephanie Mills version, huh? I did too. Stephanie Mills played the hell out of Dorothy. There she go with Toto. Now, of course, we know Stephanie Mills, the great singer, right? Still walks the earth. But we might not know Charlie Cool Smalls, who wrote the lyrics and music for The Wiz and won the Tony Award in 1975. He wrote all those songs. Remember Michael Jackson on the scarecrow or stand on the pole? You can't win. You can't get out of the game. Yeah, but here's the thing though, right? Charlie Smalls, right? He's on down the road. That's the one that made it on the radio, right? But the one I want to focus on for a minute, y'all already know, yeah, what's our theme? Home, right? When I think of home, no, I ain't gonna sing that, Stephanie Mills. When I think of home, I think of a place where there's love overflowing. I wish I was home. I wish I was back there with all the things I've been knowing. Meaning what? I don't wish I was back at home at the age I was when I was at home. I wish I was at home with what I know now. Right? They moved her from the white woman in the 1939 movie, Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, to Kansas City, Dorothy. A black gloss on the Wizard of Oz, right? Some of y'all have wished y'all could go home for a minute since y'all been here. Some of y'all been home many times to the chagrin of your friends and family. Like, I thought you was at Howard. Yeah, but Megabus comes here, so I'm coming home this weekend. And just maybe I can convince time to slow up. Giving me enough time, in my life to grow up. Time, be my friend and let me start again. No, you don't get to start again. Once you're born, you got to go on through and see the rest of it. But what you can do is remember and have vision going forward. And the ancient Egyptians have a phrase that translates my heart of different ages, meaning what? You're always going to be the 5-year-old and the 15-year-old, the 6-year-old and the 12-year-old and the 18-year-old and the 38-year-old and the 94-year-old. And when you're talking to a 5-year-old, you have to remember that she ain't been 15 yet. She hasn't been 28 yet. And sometimes we forget because we all have those different ages, but you get to those ages as you move through time and space. But home should mean something beyond the place you came into existence. Suddenly my world's gone and changed its fate, and I still know where I'm going. I've had my mind spun around in space and watched it growing. Hopefully that's happened to y'all over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks since you've been here. At least once you had your mind spun. Think about that. But then you should be able to see where you were before that and where you are after that. That's the process of being critical and self-critical, right? What does it mean to have black as home base? And what does it mean to make place? How do we look to those who can help us understand what home is and who we are and what we mean when we say we or our? Day before yesterday, some of you all sat in on a lecture by this brother, Jeff Stewart, who is a professor, worked at Howard for at one time, is now out in California. Ty had him sign her book on Elaine Locke. He just wrote a 930-page book on Elaine Locke, which has been nominated for the National Book Award. Elaine Locke spent his academic career here at Howard, went to Harvard University, got a PhD in philosophy, was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and came here to Howard to teach. And one thing Jeff Stewart talked about was the fact that there's no one way to be black. We know that. But the thing he really got in on, and y'all began to have question and answer with him, a discussion afterward, I thought was very brilliant. He said, Elaine Locke understood that while there's no one way to be black, here's one way not to be black. Is to worry about what people who are not black think about you. So blackness can't be framed by us trying to be something because somebody else we think thinks something about us. So Elaine Locke's thing is blackness should be so broad that you stand in it, whoever and however you are, and then you embrace the entire world, all the cultures, all the experiences, and then you bring that back into yourself and grow as a human being. Blackness should not trap you in blackness. Blackness should be your base out of which you experience the entire world. Nothing should be foreign to you. You should have what W.E.B. Du Bois called a broad sympathy for every human being. But you shouldn't be out trying to tell people your life matters if you haven't figured out how you think about how they think about you. Now, Michael Jackson, the trigger. Just letting y'all know. Now here Mike with his legs crossed reading a book. Gina Revecchio's article, Michael Jackson's Library. Michael Jackson had a book collection apparently of over 10,000 books. A lot of them African American, African diaspora history books. That's going to become important in about 60 seconds when we talk about the things about Michael Jackson that are in the air. The accusations, the payoffs, the questions of his humanity and how he came to move through a space, and how we position not just Michael Jackson, but celebrities as somehow supposed to be icons for us, and what they do with that iconic status or not. Here's a conversation Michael Jackson had with a friend of his in South Africa. This is the brother who was sitting with Michael Jackson relating this story. He says, man, I met him one time in South Africa. And he had a list of books lined up all along the floor. And I looked over and I was like, yo, Mike, people just sending you stuff like that? And he was like, no. That's what I read. I mean, he had everything, from the autobiography of Malcolm X to How to Eat to Live, and here come a couple of Indian philosophers. He had Sharif Sharabinto, Krishnamurti. Your brother was like, I mean, these exotic books, you know? He had a list of books that you would never imagine that Michael was down with, and we sat there 3 hours, man, chopping it up. The brother who had that experience, that's a direct quote from, of course, you see him on the left in Michael Jackson's Bad video. Y'all know Wesley Snipes, right? It's Wesley Snipes and Michael Jackson in South Africa talking about books while Michael Jackson is surrounded with books that he's reading. So when you see Remember the Time, or you see the video that he shot for the song They Don't Care About Us, if y'all remember, y'all probably not old enough to remember when Michael Jackson took on the recording industry and they tried to make him change the lyrics in that song. And then he shot a video where he had you remember the one video where he had where they were in prison? And then the other video he shot in Brazil. And I've been to Brazil, in Salvador, at the place where Michael Jackson shot that video with a group called Olodum. Very important social, cultural, grounded organization in Brazil that he shot that video. And you see all these girls and boys and then all these old women and men, and then he's got them against the police and he's in the middle of it, right? Now that's the politics, but let's get down to it. Here we're coming back to it now. Because Wesley Snipes, also a reader, also a student. Wesley Snipes, who hung out as a younger man in New York City with people like Ralph Carter, who was in Good Times. Y'all remember little Michael on Good Times? Michael used to go to First World, where Sister Keffa and Brother Bill had that study group. And he would put Wesley Snipes down with them and his other friend, Lawrence Fishburne, down with them. And they used to read and talk and discuss. So it's no accident when Wesley Snipes approached Marvel. Y'all can read this book for this story I'm about to tell y'all, at least this part of the story. Marvel went bankrupt. And they didn't think that they would have much value in their characters when it came to doing things like making movies out of them. Y'all not old enough to remember, the first major comic book movie that made money was 1978, Superman, Christopher Reeves. It was DC. Marvel was in trouble. Wesley Snipes bought the rights to some of Marvel's characters, and he thinking black conscious, so he bought some of the black ones. The first movie he made with a black character, y'all know that movie, right? Yeah, that's exactly right, Blade. Blade made money, so much money they made a sequel. And Marvel was like, oh, shit. Oh, wait, did we sell that Negro all the rights to? No, just the black characters, just some of the black characters. The movie he wanted to make, but he says now, y'all probably seen some of these interviews, the technology wasn't right, I'm glad they waited, was of course this one. He wanted to play Black Panther. And it's probably best that he didn't, because he would have been in a cat suit with strings on it trying to jump. No, it needed to wait for the CGI and all that kind of stuff, right? But that's not even where I'm going with this. The importance is that Black Panther, like Remember the Time, made more of a dent in how we think about Africa. For Mike and them, ancient Africa, because I promise you, Iman looks closer to any of the Egyptian queens than any of that stuff that we be seeing. She's from East Africa. Very deliberate casting, including celebrities, Magic Johnson, right? Eddie Murphy. Black Panther did more for a public raising of the idea that Africa is not a land of Tarzan and jungle, than years of scholars writing books, having classes, years of us sitting here. Now, people go see a movie. So celebrity becomes almost like they're the teachers. But what happens when the teachers are human beings who are deeply flawed? And it's much more complicated than that. But he's not alone. Shit, Wesley Snipes went to jail for tax evasion. He becomes a punchline in jokes. This is a man who was trying to build a black production company, make black films, get those black characters on the screen, who then gets in trouble with the law, who goes to jail, and Denzel and them, Larry Fishburne, Spike Lee, everybody go out there, Angela Bassett, everybody trying to defend Wesley Snipes because he paid the taxes. He wrote the check for any back taxes that was due in the courtroom, and the judge still said you're going to jail. Now, you know, typically in those kind of situations, your accountant, well, my accountant, but here's the money. Okay, well, we'll find you. No, nigga, you're going to jail. Because a lot of being black in the modern world means what people think about you and not what you think about yourself. Denzel can't save you. This ain't the movies, bro. And then, of course, there's this man. What does it mean to be home? What does it mean to imagine home, but then to have to rely on television? A man who grew up in the Richard Allen Projects in North Philadelphia, who made the Richard Allen Projects the home base for a cartoon that we grew up on, my generation. Bill Cosby and the Cosby Kids was set in the Richard Allen Projects. Some of y'all didn't know that. Who then came back around and made a television show that people now taking off TV because of the living human being, Bill Cosby. Again, what does Elaine Locke say? It's not about who we think other people think we are. It's how we think we are. And who we are is a complex thing. So after class, tomorrow, the rest of y'all career, Howard, come see me on the third floor of the library, talk to each other, we talk, and we try to figure out how we think about this. If there is a we that can come to some consensus about this. But one thing's for sure, tonight, he going back the same place he was last night, the correctional facility. And so, this is a picture from Martin Luther King High School in Philadelphia. I was their commencement speaker back in June. What is the distance between celebrity as we experience it, art as we experience it, and the living human being? And what does it mean when we listen to artists and entertainers more than each other in academic spaces trying to figure out how we get home? When you can make a movie and change everybody's mind about Africa but can't get nobody to read a little bitty book and have a conversation with each other. Because there is no Wakanda. I'm sorry. And Wakanda is great. I'm happy. And you shouldn't have to rely on an imaginary Africa or an imaginary any place to be in the world and have the kind of humanity in the world that we can deal with each other. So let's talk about a few more celebrities. Some of y'all were around 3 weeks ago when Kevin Hart came over to the School of Business with Will Packer. Yeah, they didn't tell everybody because they thought all of DC would be here if they just put it everywhere, right? And so, but what tripped me out, and it didn't trip me out that the auditorium was almost full at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning from Howard students, because I know that they're not coming there to hear me or any other member of this faculty. They come in because it's a celebrity. It didn't trip me out, right? Now that's afterwards. We stand there talking because, you know, Will got some family here at Howard, and I met him right here on this stage a few years ago when they remade Roots. Now, Will Packer is one of the biggest producers in Hollywood. We know that, right? You know, Ride Along and all the other movies that he made, Girls Trip and all that stuff. And they were here promoting Night School. But the thing that Will is doing with some of that clout, he's trying to remake historical movies because he knows this generation doesn't read books the same way, right? So he's trying to do something different. Now, Will, at that point, we just laughing because Will went to Florida A&M and I went to Tennessee State. So we're public HBCU or field Negroes. HBCU field Negroes. Right? So I'm glad y'all let me work at the house. I'm very clear I'm a field Negro. But what Kevin Hart, who went to no college, because Will was clowning him, right? He came up in Philly, he said, I was in community college for 2 weeks, dropped out. He said, but the message he gave that day was very interesting to me, because I can be very critical of all these films, and am very critical and candid. At the same time, I understand that our people going to see this stuff. This man's selling out stadiums. Nick, you know, him and Nick Cannon can fill up stadiums. It's like, dude, so we'll talk about this maybe after class. Some of y'all want to stick around. Or later on in the semester. Do they have a responsibility to us? Who are we? These are not academics. In fact, that's what Kevin is doing, is clowning Will, because he says, is that how y'all do it? Is that how y'all do it? That's that Florida A&M Rattler strike and strike again, right? So we clowning him like, yeah, dude, that's all right, though. We got degrees. No, but it's signified. It's all in love. Why? Because God knows I will never be as influential as that little brother in the middle there. And what does that say? What does that say? Because he called himself that. What does that say about us? Sometimes we think of learning as skill acquisition. One of the things he said 3 Saturdays ago was, I had to go back and get the skills that I didn't get because I didn't go to school. Because now I got money and I want to be able to have my own companies. I want to put other people on. And so I need those skills. So I had to go back and study things that I would have learned in college. That's what he's telling the students. He's telling y'all, stay in college, do your work. Y'all know how that works. Yeah, I understand. Can I intern with you, though? Education becomes a tool. Learning becomes a means to an end and not a means in itself. So I'm listening saying this is an excellent master class in how we have to begin to think about education. Because I know a lot of times here at Howard, I mean, y'all were here for a week before any of the academic stuff happened. Y'all was swag surfing and went and going to parties, and I'm thinking, and it wasn't y'all doing it. It was the university. I'm like, wow, this is fascinating to me. So what are we going to do when they come to class? Now, I'm the type of Negro try to entertain y'all a little bit, but I know all y'all got at least one professor on your roster that ain't trying to entertain nobody. Turn to page 35. Read or fail. Now see, me, I love those kind of professors. That's who trained me. But I also grew up in a moment when I understood the value of the other way of doing it. And I was a theater major, so I had an advantage. Yeah, I went to law school off a theater degree. Anybody telling y'all got a major in what you majoring in to go on with life has lied to you, okay? Now, but that's the conversation for after class. Let me get through these slides. Hard work becomes the modality. Hard work becomes the thing that they tell you you must do to achieve. And it's true. But grinding often becomes a substitute for content mastery. Kevin Hart, don't nobody work harder than him. I'm going to tell you right now, y'all see Nick Cannon on this campus. Nick is in 2 of my classes this semester. He can't come every class, but when he's here, he's here. Sometimes that boy, he's almost 40 years old. That young brother gets on a plane in LA, lands here first thing in the morning, comes straight to class. So he's not faking it. But my point is this, that's hard work. I'm like, bro, I can't do that. And yet, after that conversation we had last night with students in the Tuesday night class, I stayed up real late thinking about that because that's my job. I'm going to play my position. Everybody play their position, we will get free. My job, all that damn tuition y'all paid, is to know more than y'all know about this stuff. If I don't know more than y'all know, then why are y'all paying tuition? So the whole point is that, but my job is also to help you think critically, acquire some of that content, and then run on to a place that I'm going to be in the ground and never see with my eyes, just like somebody helped me. That's part of it. But hard work is a modality. Now, here's the equation, though, that a lot of students came out of there with, went in there with. Education plus hard work equals success. Question mark? Not always, right? There's a lawsuit going on right now, been filed at Harvard by a white supremacist named Edward Bloom. He's got a lot of money. He's a billionaire. He keeps funding these challenges to what we call affirmative action. There's a man who's trying to get on the Supreme Court now who, if he gets on the Supreme Court, will be the fifth vote to overturn affirmative action. Not that that bothers any of us, because we made the right choice to come here. Again, y'all wasn't thinking about how other people think about you as part of your job, your application for college. You thought about how you thought about yourself, then let us think about you, and now we all here, freed for at least 4 years of the burden of having to explain your humanity to somebody else. And that doesn't matter whether you're black or not black. This is a place where your humanity is not in question. Or if it is in question, it's going to be something we need to have a serious conversation with, and it's not going to be a racial conversation. Affirmative action is important, but this man has filed a lawsuit saying that Harvard isn't letting in as many Asian Americans as are qualified to get into Harvard with top SAT scores and grades. But he's not doing that for Asian Americans. He's doing that so if he wins that lawsuit and they get rid of affirmative action, you can't use race at all as a factor. So he's trying to raise the number of white people at Harvard and 100 other schools. So by the time y'all get to be seniors, it may be 100 million people applying to get to Howard. And God knows there ain't no place to put them. But the challenge we have is the erasure of intellectual work. That's the challenge. Why are we here? Why did you choose this as your temporary home? Why did you choose this to make a place from 18 to 22 or 19 to 24 or for the rest of your life, however long you're here? What does it mean to do intellectual work? And what did our man Kasula say in Barracoon? A lesson from Barracoon. We call our village Africa Town in Alabama. We say that because we want to go back to the Africa soil and we see we can't go. Therefore, we make the Africa where they fetch us. Meaning what? Ain't nobody going back in time. Ain't nobody talking about becoming an ancient Egyptian. Ain't nobody talking about being African in the way that we were African. If anybody who's doing that, and I know some cats that are, see, Hotep means peace in ancient Egyptian language, hieroglyphs, and when people call them Hoteps, they have revealed, not you, but the people who invented that as a label of derision have opened their mouth, as my mama used to say, who's 90 years old, and put their entire brain on display. Because at Howard University, we teach Middle Egyptian, known as Egyptian hieroglyphs. And you could write in an Egyptian hieroglyphic sentence that you don't know anything about Hotep, give it to a person that uses Hotep as a label of derision, and watch them scratch their heads trying to figure out where Hotep is. But then they would say, I ain't talking about that anyway. I'm talking about them people that come up to you and say, peace, queen. Can I holler at you for a minute? And guess where that Hotep label came from? It came from inside the black nationalist community as a critique of the people who are giving Hotep a bad name. But now it's become used by people who have derision for that entire argument that we should study Africa. Oh, it's a terrible thing. We talk about that during office hours, though. The point is, we ain't trying to go back nowhere. But we should be able to stand in our base of knowledge from everything we've ever done, select out of it the best, and then go forward to build a vision. That's why you study the past. You don't study the past to go backward. That's why you had the Sankofa bird, right? So our man Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who came to Howard to talk to the freshman class several years ago after we read his book, Something Torn and New, wrote another book, Secure the Base, where he's saying you've got to secure where you stand in time and place. Because if you don't, the winds of the world will blow you in any direction. You'll respond to anything. Ngugi wa Thiong'o from Kenya, an elder now, in his 80s, still writing, who at one time said, I'm not going to write in English anymore because the people in my country speak Swahili and Gikuyu, and I'm going to write in my native language, Gikuyu. And if you want to read me, you translate me from Gikuyu into English or French or Spanish. But I'm going to write for my people because I don't want my people to think that reading and writing is something that only elites do. In other words, how do you become an intellectual that never leaves your base but then goes out into the world from your base? So learning, wisdom, and the African world. Experiences Meaning we have to have a process for making that home. The first thing is we have to have some content development, some learning. Not just skill development, but content. That's why we read Barracoon. We want some facts. We want some information. We want some experiences that we didn't have that we can learn and then ground ourselves. And then from there, we get into the criticality. This is what our friend Dr. Stewart was talking about the day before yesterday. We made a video, so y'all can watch that. Jeff Stewart is like, you got to have a critical discussion, but you can't have a critical discussion standing no place, because we all have feelings and emotions. All of us. And the thing is, we honor each other's experiences, all of our feelings and emotions. We also acquire content to help us think through those feelings and emotions. And then as we do that, we can create for the future, make things better. There is no rule in reality that says that tomorrow will be better than yesterday. That's up to us. Every day is that possibility, right? James Baldwin said the time is always now. And those of us who are real big Baldwin fans, the James Baldwin papers are in New York at the Schomburg. There are parts of his papers that are closed off, because I guarantee you, if you knew everything about James Baldwin's life just from the documents that exist, there would be a lot of rethinking of James Baldwin. But again, the question comes up, do you separate the art from the artist? That's the open question. We don't have a set answer. So let's do some quick distinguishing between experience, learning, and wisdom. These are some young people who are protesting, saying that Black Lives Matter in Minneapolis, at the Mall of Minneapolis. I don't tell people my life matters. If they want to try me, they'll find out how much it matters. Then they're going to have to ask them a different question. Does your life matter? And I'm not saying that except to say I ain't going to mess with nobody that don't mess with me. But if you mess with me, see me at the class. I'm going to read y'all something Martin Delaney said when they passed the Fugitive Slave Act. He said, you come in my door kicking with the Constitution on your chest and waving the Declaration of Independence. If one of us leave there, if both of us leave there alive, I failed in my job. That was 1850, but we'll talk about that another time. Disruption can be revolutionary, but simple resistance is not in itself excellence. Resisting alone isn't excellence. It's important, but it isn't in itself excellence. Experience can inspire, and learning is necessary for wisdom, but neither in itself is wisdom by itself. We all need master teachers. Find somebody to sit up under that can help you get where you're trying to get. We were in Egypt. This is a picture from about 10 years ago. In fact, I know it's 10 years ago because my mother just turned 90. That's when she was 80. We put our money together and took her to Egypt with me. She looking at the walls like everybody else, looking at the ancestors, right? She's born on a floor in Alabama, on a pallet in Russell County, Alabama. Ironically, Russell County is where Catherine Screws is from. Catherine Screws, that was her maiden name. Her married name was Jackson after they moved to Gary, Indiana. Michael Jackson's mother and my mother born in the same county in Alabama. All the singers in Michael Jackson's family came through his mother's line. But she's standing there doing it because you're never too old to acquire new experiences. She's stone cold Christian, looking on the wall of the creation story that gave birth to the story of the birth of Jesus Christ, that is at least 3,000 years older than that story as written down. Didn't change her from being a Christian. She's standing in her blackness, embracing a larger world. We all have to become as master listeners, always absorbing, always thinking. I can see y'all thinking now. This is very important. Instruction is what links generations. If people hadn't heard Randy Weston's music, they wouldn't come to a funeral for him. Somebody came up a couple of weeks ago. I was playing John Coltrane, whose birthday was a couple of days ago, Equinox. And the brother said, I like that. What is that song? I said, Equinox, the great John Coltrane. A lot of times I have colleagues who play Coltrane in class. They say the one thing some students remember from the class is when they got introduced to John Coltrane or Billie Holiday or Melba Liston, you understand? But instruction links generations. This is a picture of Seti I as a little boy with his father, Ramses II, looking at everybody who was the ruler before them. That's in that same temple I just showed y'all. You got to know the past to go forward because you're going to be running the thing one day. And there were women, Hatshepsut, who they didn't put on that list because they didn't like how they ruled the country. You got sexism in Africa. You ain't got to go out of Africa to look for sexism. You don't have to leave Africa to look for the origins of sexism. It's a complicated story, right? This is an interesting book. Sasha wrote this book, The House of 20,000 Books. See, I grew up in a place where my grandfather had all these books. Yeah, it's nice to have all those books, but did you read any of them? Right? The search for, I could talk about the satire of the trades, Dwa-Keti. That's from ancient Egypt. He says the highest profession is the one who learns, what they call the scribe, right? The search for good speeches, or medu-nefer, that's the word in ancient Egyptian, are the foundations of an intergenerational education. That's that same temple. I'm looking at a picture of Jehudi and Seshet. Seshet is the woman who you see here, who is said to have created everything that can be measured and counted. She is the goddess of architecture. That thing on her head is an astronomical device. Y'all can ask Dr. Beatty, who's coming next week, about that. Here's an imagining of her now by an artist who knows that story, right? And here's a real life librarian who follows in her tradition, Carla Hayden, who is over the Library of Congress. She's a daughter of Seshet, because Seshet is also the one who invented libraries. You know, black women have a problem with math. I say it's a problem with memory. He invented math. So that's why we made, Africana Studies at Howard is 50 years old this year. So y'all can order these t-shirts. We actually got these. We redid Founders Library. So there's Seshet is in there, the Congo Cosmogram, Seshet at the top. You see her at the top? There's a lot in there, but y'all can look at that another time. There are ground rules for and challenges to doing this intellectual work. First thing is you got to be here. You got to be present. That's important. We're here. But you got to be there listening, right? There's a book that came out, Catherine Price's book, How to Break Up with Your Phone. There's another book called The Shallows, Nicholas Carr, no relation, unless his ancestors own mine. In that book, Nicholas Carr he says, just as neurons that fire together wire together, neurons that don't fire together don't wire together. Jules will tell us about these plastic brains, right? As the time we spend scanning web pages crowds out the time we spend reading books, different type of intellectual work involved there. The circuits that support those old intellectual functions and pursuits weaken and begin to break apart. Our brains are plastic. How we learn impacts how we think about content, how we think about the future. And y'all can ask Christian and Angela, the TAs in this class who work with Dr. Harrell about that. That's why they're in graduate school studying this kind of work. We have to read and write. And then finally, we have to speak to Meket. Meket is the ancient Egyptian word which means before, during, and after. It's translated as after. How do you do that work? Got to hurry up. I got a couple of more slides. This is from last year. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Brother Ta-Nehisi, wrote an article called The First White President in the Atlantic Monthly. And in it, Ta-Nehisi says the first white president in American history is also the most dangerous president. He's talking about Trump. We know there were white ones before, but he made whiteness his platform for winning. And he made it more dangerous still by the fact that those charged with analyzing him cannot name his essential nature because they are too implicated by it. They can't call him a hypocrite. They can't call him a liar because they have triple, quadrupled down on white supremacy. You'll never be an American to these people. And guess what? They done thrown white women under the bus now. But this man, I don't care whether it happened or not. We're going to put him on the Supreme Court. That's what Mitch McConnell said because he stole the Supreme Court seat to do it. And if they put him on the Supreme Court, you will no longer have the right to terminate a pregnancy as protected by federal law because they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade. Trust on that. This is yesterday. Y'all saw this fool. He's trying to smile, but he's grimacing in because he just said his presidency did more than almost any presidency in the history of America. And what did they do? They started laughing at him. Donald Trump bragged about himself to the United Nations and the UN laughed, meaning what? The world. But don't lose focus. What comes after that? We ain't thinking about that fool. We're thinking about us. How do we speak to after? How do we do that? Last two slides. Congo Square. I know it's 1257. Don't worry. Those of you from New Orleans know Congo Square. We're talking about that statue of Louis Armstrong. That's my hero. I love Louis Armstrong. I didn't have to meet him physically because I listen to his music every day. He's looking toward a hall, that statue, where they wouldn't allow him to play. That's one of his friends, Sidney Bechet, the great clarinetist. There's Mahalia Jackson, also from New Orleans, all in Congo Square. And here's the ancestor, a rendering of him, Buddy Bolden. There's no pictures of Buddy Bolden, so the sister who sculpted that just used her imagination, but she stood in a place to do it. Why do I have all that? Because it was in New Orleans that the brother to the left, my friend Nick Payton, met the ancestor, Randy Weston, for the first time. Nick is from this generation of jazz musicians, a brilliant brother. This is his latest mixtape, the Afro-Caribbean mixtape. On the back, he included a whole lot of Africans who he put into this thing, and he used voices from ancestors. Art Blakey, he used me. I was like, Nick, don't put me with them ancestors, man. He said, no, because the young people need to know. Nick said this. Nick said, I've often toyed with the theory that somehow Africans submitted to slavery in an attempt to become better versions of themselves. That's some controversial stuff. With this album, I am channeling the energy of the ancestors to help give Africa back to herself in the best way I know how, through the power of music. Long before there was a civil rights movement, there was a Black American movement. Long before there was an Africa Town, there were values. Long before there was a Howard 2018 freshman seminar, there was a base for us to learn from. I see y'all getting ready, but that's all right. Give me a second. Speak to Maquette. Any of you know August Wilson from Pittsburgh? That's right, the Berg, right? August Wilson talks about the fact that he didn't even like the blues. Then he said, I think that's the core of Black aesthetics, the ability to improvise. That is what has enabled our survival. I'm sorry, jazz. He said, I came to jazz late, man. I wasn't interested in jazz. I remember guys walking around with John Coltrane, Archie Shepp albums under their arm, and I go, oh man, it ain't got no words. If it didn't have any words, I wasn't that interested. All right, hold with me now. It's 59. I know we got 60 seconds. He said, all that changed on an October night in 1966 when I came up on Kirkpatrick and Wiley Avenue in Pittsburgh and saw about 200 people standing out on the corner, which was unusual. The first thing I thought was that somebody got killed. So I run down there and I say, hey man, what's happening? And they go, shh. And they were listening to John Coltrane out of the Crawford Grill, you see. And the people inside the Crawford Grill, because the drinks cost 90 cents, and 66, that's a whole lot of money. The people inside, they don't even know how to spell John Coltrane's name. They inside talking about what they're going to do Friday night, and so-and-so's cousin got a new Lincoln Continental, you see. These the bourgeois Negroes. They just there because it's the place to be. But watch this. John Coltrane ain't playing to them, man. He playing to the brothers out on the street because the music's coming straight over their heads and out on the street. And the brothers outside, they praying. This is their music. This is what has enabled them to survive those outrageous insults that American society has forced on them. So when I saw 200 niggas stunned into silence by the power of art in the music of John Coltrane and his exploration of man's relationship to the divinity, that's when I got interested in jazz. And also as a young man, wanting to be a writer, I said, this is what I want my art to do. I want to accomplish that. Let me pause for a second because I know it's time to go. This is what I would ask you all to do. Some of y'all got classes. I got one more slide that I want to show you all, and I'm going to put it right here. But those of you who have to move, if you could do it quietly, I understand. But if the rest of you can stay about 60 more seconds, please do. Movements in knowledge. And don't block Dr. Yeboah, because this is for the tape. Movements in knowledge, we have to build our house of life. How do we build our house of life? And I appreciate those of you who have stayed, because this is especially for you. We know that the university we live in and we work in is based on European models from the church. And that those European models of the church come out of original African models, but they adopted them to their way of being in the world. We know that the American universities that we go to, the Ivy League, my brother Craig Stephen Wilder wrote a book, Ebony and Ivory, Race, Slavery, and the Troubled History of America's Universities. The models that we use for the university are based on white supremacy. All the Ivy League schools had rooms where they could bring their slaves. Princeton, James Madison went to school at Princeton. They had rooms for the enslaved African to live there because he brought his people with him. Howard University got the same model as those other schools. So finally, we have to search for truth, train new generations, generate new knowledge by going back. That's us from last month in August. We were in Egypt at the Abu Simbel Temple. Anybody y'all want to go? We got that for y'all. That's what we do. We don't just go to the African burial ground. We go around the world. But we go around the world, meaning what? We knew what we were looking at before we went. This is the end of a journey for them. And right there, you see Dr. Bailey on the right there, dead center. That's my nephew, my 15-year-old nephew. Yes, we went broke getting him over there, but the important thing was get him over here early. By the time he get here, he will have had certain experiences. Just like by the time y'all got here, y'all had experiences y'all parents didn't have. This is us at Saqqara. The first stone building in the world is there, built by a dude named Imhotep. Hotep Twitter. Okay, Hotep, away from me. Imhotep. Come in peace. That pyramid in the back, that's the first pyramid that we see. The step pyramid. We're standing there with the Medu Neter, these women and men. There's a new book by Ayikwe Arma, Wat Nsimsu. And this is the last quote. Ain't you home for me? There's the last. Of Africa's oldest ways of life and death, there are two. One, the royal road, irresistibly attractive to power addicts, is lined with hierarchies, priests, armies, and bureaucracies. And I might add internships and first ones and top 100 rankings and how do we move to the top and get me on and the 8 to hustle. Okay. It gave Plato his liberal model of the slave-owning aristocracy, the template for imperial, colonial, and apartheid systems of social inequality. Here's the different way he writes about. The way of companions is more ancient, but it's been so long suppressed it sounds novel. It values knowledge over power. On that intelligent way, no one is born superior, none inferior. It needs neither violence nor fraud. No person, no gender, no race or tribe is discriminated against. It creates no unemployed, no homeless migrants, no refugees, no millionaires or destitutes, only equal humans. And finally, what Ayikwe Ama is saying to you is the ancient way of companions, of us being a we together, of building our home and moving out. The way of companions is the way of you, the beautiful ones. Everybody don't get to go to the future, but we're going to get there together. All right, I appreciate y'all staying for a couple minutes over. Thank you. Next week, you get to hear from the real scholar, Dr. Mario Beatty.